Welcome, one and all, to this virtual function room where 3 federal government scientists will speak about their involvement in forward-thinking, planning, and designing laboratories for the science of the future. My name is Janik Cazabon, and I'll be your moderator today. With me today are Dr. Robert Black, Dr. Claudie and Dr. Josué Jautzy. I'm delighted that you could join me here today for this conversation. All 3 of you participated in workshops to help design new federal laboratories as part of the Laboratories Canada strategy, which is a 25-year project that aims at strengthening federal science by facilitating collaborative, multidisciplinary research in adaptable, leading-edge, and multi-tenant facilities. So thank you so much for sharing your experience with us today. To begin, I will ask each of you to introduce yourselves and provide a quick overview of the current responsibilities. So Robert, can you start us off?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Robert Black, and I'm a research officer with NRC, and I have been involved with developing the laboratories and essentially the infrastructure of NRC Mississauga.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Claudie, how about you?
Bonjour à tous, mon nom est Claudie Roy. Je travaille présentement avec Robert Black, aussi au niveau CNRC qui va être situé à Mississauga. Donc, Robert et moi, on a des responsabilités différentes dues à nos différents domaines de recherche, mais on travaille ensemble pour designer les nouveaux laboratoires.
Super, merci beaucoup, Claudie. Josué, c'est à ton tour.
Hello, my name is Josué Jautzy, and I'm a research scientist at the Geological Survey of Canada, so that's Natural Resources Canada. And as a research scientist, I've been involved in helping, consulting with people, with architects, etc., to develop like the upgrade of our laboratory. Essentially discussing mass spectrometric needs and this type of things.
Great, thank you so much for introducing yourself. So before I dive right into our first question, I just want to mention that you're obviously free to answer the question in the language of your choice, or one of the official languages rather, and we'll begin. So the first question I have for you is, how important is it to have scientists involved in the planning and designing of laboratories infrastructures? So we'll start with Claudie. Can you share your thoughts on that?
Yes, of course. So, so for me, it was my first experience helping design like new labs for a research facility, and I was really glad that they asked us to do that, because like bottom line, we'll be the ones doing research in the labs, and we have a clear vision of what's working great at the moment and what could be improved. So I think to work with architects and people also specialize in that area, then together you can really come up with like great innovative solutions to design better labs.
Great. Robert, do you have any additional thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I mostly agree with what Claudie said, but I'd just like to emphasize that, at least in our experience, where it became very important is when essentially we got down to the nitty-gritty of planning. So there was essentially 2 phases. One of them is more of a larger picture, which is where the scientist is important to help define, you know, essentially how the lab's going to be used in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. But then when it came down to designing, say, actual room by room, the infrastructure that we would want, the equipment, what operations would go on in these rooms, I think that's where the scientist input was critical. Just, you know, the requirement, the fact that they're the ones that are going to be using the lab for many years to come. And so that's where I think especially the role of the scientist was very important.
Okay, Josué, is the same experience for you at NRCan?
Moi, je suis absolument d'accord avec Claudie et Robert. Effectivement, c'est les premiers utilisateurs des laboratoires qui sont le plus au courant de ce dont on a besoin, comment ça fonctionne tous les jours. Puis j'ajouterais aussi qu'en fait, il y a plusieurs types d'utilisateurs dans un laboratoire. Finalement, on a des chercheurs, on a des techniciens, on a le manager du laboratoire, puis on a les étudiants. Et en fait, je pense que c'est important d'avoir toujours de l'input, de l'avis, en fait, l'avis de chacun de ces personnes, chacun de ces utilisateurs, parce qu'ils ont tous une vision un petit peu différente de l'utilisation du laboratoire et donc de la manière de l'optimiser le plus possible quand on a justement l'opportunité de l'améliorer.
Super, merci. Alors maintenant, je vais puiser un peu dans votre expérience au niveau du designing du laboratoire. So when you're planning and designing these long-term spaces, Robert, how do you consider the need of scientists, not only of today, but of the future?
Okay, I'm off mute. So in particular, when we're designing these labs, you know, kind of to the previous question a little bit, where the need of the scientist comes in is when we have to consider not only today, but of the future, we have to consider where the research area is going, which is where the scientists can provide the most input. So, you know, for example, there could be research being done today on a specific material, but then we need to understand where that field could potentially go in approximately, you know, 5-10 years time, and design for that. Not only just with respect to, say, the physical space, so some of the equipment, etc., which of course is important to consider, but also essentially the capabilities and how the research will be performed. And one example of that is for NRC Mississauga, I'm involved in the area of accelerated materials discovery. So using not just, say, physical lab experiments that, you know, more traditionally what a scientist does in the lab, but looking at it in terms of accelerated material discovery, so incorporating areas of AI, data science, etc., to really drive the research. And so when you consider, say, that a variety of research areas could go in this direction, not only do you have to consider the physical space, so the equipment that's going to be used, but you also essentially have to future-proof it in terms of, say, dealing with data science, big data, data storage, and ultimately having the infrastructure in place to handle that approach to science as well, as opposed to, say, the more traditional scientist laboratory, which is focused on physical instrumentation and essentially doing the experiments.
Josué, is your experience somewhat the same in terms of seeing these capacities or capacities for the future within your labs, and what's changing drastically between now and today? Would you say somewhat of a similar experience?
I would say it's pretty similar. It's of course it's like it's field different depending on your field, but for us, instrumentation is a big part of it. We're using mass spectrometer, which is basically like a weighing machine for atoms, and there are some technological improvements, and you have to be always aware of what's going on in your field, what is getting better, what innovation is driving the field and the technology, and how this could impact like what type of instrumentation you will have in your lab in the future. Now, every flashy innovation that you can see in the literature now will not necessarily become something that will be meaningful in the science. So that's where the scientist has the knowledge to like kind of see predict what will be important for the future. And I also agree with Robert on the fact that big data and the volume of data that we're acquiring now with our instrumentation is getting bigger, and we might not have always like the means of analyzing this data yet, but we need to store it, and we have to think about how we're going to analyze this like in the future. So yes, like computers and storage and like your network infrastructure, how you save your data, what type of computer you have, the server, etc., is now a really important thing when you redesign or design laboratories, I think.
Claudie, how do you future-proof on your end? How do you can think about that? Comment penser au futur sans penser nécessairement aux besoins d'aujourd'hui?
Je pense que les points que Robert et Josué ont amenés sont vraiment valides, puis on voit un peu où le domaine s'en va, puis l'importance de l'intelligence artificielle, puis la gestion des données. Mais en même temps, quand on a apporté ou quand on a aidé pour le design des nouveaux laboratoires, un des trucs qu'on a vraiment mis de l'avant, comparé à ce que j'observe aujourd'hui dans le laboratoire, c'est la flexibilité, puis s'arranger pour que les laboratoires soient le plus modulables possible. Donc, au lieu d'avoir des petites pièces, par exemple, on essaie d'avoir les plus grandes pièces possibles avec des murs qui peuvent soit être ajoutées ou enlevées relativement facilement, des paillasses aussi qui sont qui peuvent être déplacées. Donc, on peut avoir des plus petites paillasses avec des espaces de rangement ou sinon enlever l'espace de rangement pour faire des grandes tables pour essayer d'encourager la collaboration. Puis ça, c'est vraiment, je dirais, assez nouveau si je compare à ce que j'observe présentement, là, parce que c'est vrai. On sait un peu où est-ce que ça s'en va, mais c'est tellement dur de prédire qu'on ne veut pas, quand on va être arrivé là, dans 5 ans, que ce soit déjà désuet. Fait que c'est vraiment super important de faire les labs les plus flexibles possibles pour que ça puisse accommoder différents types de recherches, dépendamment de où on s'en va.
Super. Josué, je voulais te poser la question de ton côté. Dans ton expérience dans le passé, la société était différente, c'est sûr. Dans les anciens laboratoires, c'était un peu une réflexion de la société de l'époque, il y a peut-être 25 ans. Alors maintenant, de nos jours, on a peut-être des approches différentes. Donc, how top of mind was inclusivity, so accessible design and accessibility in your experience in the planning and designing of these modern facilities?
Yeah, true. The society has evolved quite a bit. Fun facts, I did my undergrad in France, and I'm not that old, but I remember, and it was in chemistry, and I remember that in chemistry, in the big amphitheaters, which were very close to the labs, people were smoking still. So that was France back in, when was that, 2007 or something like that? But those were the last amphitheater where you could smoke. So there is definitely nobody smoking close to labs anymore today. So yeah, it changes. In terms of inclusivity, I think one of the major challenge is probably thinking about adapting our laboratories to people with disabilities. And it is not necessarily an easy thing. We're not quite at this stage yet at NRCan. We haven't fully planned the internal design. It's more about the outside wall and infrastructure. But some of the things that we can think about is lab bench that could be adjustable in height. And we definitely need to look into more classical laboratory equipment, like fume hoods, for example, that usually are not adapted to people in wheelchair, for example. But everything that is computer that are controlling laboratory could be on desk, for example, that are adaptable in height, and that would be one of the avenue of adapting and having this more adapted to people with disabilities, for example.
And Claudie and Robert, I don't know if the experience is the same for the laboratories for NRC. How was top of mind with the idea of trying to be more as inclusive as possible?
If I can start, so I think the technology is there. So I was really impressed. So I've been in a company visiting seeing the new fume hoods that they have, the new benches, and what they have is really amazing. So you can really adjust the height of the fume hood and the benches, and even the storage on top of it. And at Mississauga, I know that we'll get that. So I'm really happy and glad to say that we're developing the new labs. So we are we can accommodate people with disabilities, but also sometimes it's just as simple as I'm relatively short and I cannot store stuff. So also for everyone, if you're tall or short, you can also adjust your lab space so it fits better to you. And also it's so important to have elevators and doors that can open easily for people with disabilities. But I really think that the technology is there, and it's just for us to use it at this point.
Robert, do you have anything to add on or any thoughts on that? I think you're on mute, Robert.
Sincere apologies. No, I think Claudie summarized what I had in mind and said it a lot better than I probably could, so nothing to add.
Okay, well, maybe let me pick your brain on something else. We've talked a lot about the laboratory, the side of, and the research side of things, but I'm understanding that in modern facilities we're also looking at new ways to collaborate between scientists and maybe more informal ways of collaborating. So can you tell me a little bit about that experience you had in terms of your design experience?
Yeah, I feel like, especially for a site like NRC Mississauga, collaboration was probably one of the biggest. Basically, we were driving for a very collaborative space, almost borrowing from the tech industries in some areas, just with respect to the amount of space that's dedicated to collaboratives, that's dedicated to collaboration. But then also, especially given what's been going on lately with COVID. There's been a lot of effort in making, say, remote collaboration possible as well. So not only having dedicated meeting spaces, quiet rooms for small talk among a few people, all the way to massive, essentially massive office areas, but also having the network capabilities available to collaborate remotely, basically at any time through large boards that you could draw equations on and everything like that, digital boards of course, and everything like that. So I feel like collaboration, especially now more than ever, is very important when designing a new lab, and definitely, at least in our experience with, say, NRC Mississauga, has been a big driving factor for some of the design considerations.
Great. Josué, what's your thoughts in terms of the collaboration, and are there any barriers to collaborations that were considered as you were working with your group to think about these laboratories of the future?
Absolutely. I think the main thing is breaking down walls. Like, we often in all design lab, we have a lot of walls everywhere, and this is just bad. Because you have people working on one side of the wall on one instrument, people on the other side. Different instrument, different type of data is acquired, but if the wall was not there, they could talk to each other, they could learn from each other, and they could potentially put their thought together and develop new ideas, new science, understand better how one instrument is working and how it can improve the other, and this type of things. And this is especially important for students. When students are put in small little rooms, in silos like that, that's how you actually create future silo science. You don't create multidisciplinary science. Yeah, that's it.
Claudie, tu as mentionné dans une conversation aussi que c'est non seulement la collaboration scientifique, mais au niveau des espaces, qu'on commence à avoir un changement au niveau des espaces de travail. Donc, d'avoir des espaces qui sont plus informels pour des rencontres, différents types d'espaces de travail qui ne sont pas nécessairement au côté laboratoire. Peux-tu m'en dire plus au sujet de comment ça a influencé un peu votre approche au niveau du design?
Oui, tout à fait. Donc, en fait, on se rend compte quand même que souvent, on a beaucoup de discussions de corridor ou à la machine à café ou qui ne sont pas nécessairement au bureau dans des meetings formels. Puis dans les nouveaux labs qui ont été designés, on a vraiment voulu mettre ça de l'avant, puis avoir des espaces qui permettaient ce type de discussion-là, en créant des espaces plus confortables où on pouvait prendre une tasse de café ou des îlots pour se concentrer. Puis je pense aussi qu'il y a un nouvel aspect que j'apprécie particulièrement, c'est d'avoir des espaces de bureau en plus pour les collaborateurs. Parce que souvent, des fois, tu vas dans une autre bâtisse pour visiter, puis il n'y a pas vraiment de place pour t'installer. Puis ça va peut-être pas te porter à revenir. Alors que si à chaque fois que tu venais visiter pour faire de la collaboration, tu avais une place à toi assignée parce qu'il y a plus de bureaux disponibles, je trouve que ça l'aide beaucoup à la collaboration. Puis d'avoir des espaces plus ouverts où c'est facile d'interagir avec les gens puis tu n'as pas nécessairement besoin d'aller cogner à la porte. Je trouve que ça enlève une certaine barrière pour la communication.
Oui, puis ça fait une chose différente. We have a question from the audience, and I think it was spurred from the conversation that we had with regards to inclusivity, and it's less to do about universal accessibility and even less about physical mobility, so height and being height challenged or what that could be, but it's more about from a social point of view. And the question is reconciliation considered in the design of the new lab spaces? So creating culturally safe spaces for Indigenous employees and partners. So I don't know if there's anybody in the group has any thoughts on that in terms of your personal experience.
I think that's a really great comment. I don't know if I can answer it, but I think that the fact that we try to make these labs the more flexible and modular as we can, then, you know, when you come in and start working in new places, you can really adapt it to how you think would be the most comfortable for you, whoever you are. So I think in that way, that could also help, like, on the social side as well. I don't know if that could answer partially the question.
No, that's great. I think that's a great answer. Thank you. And Robert, Josué, I don't know if you've had any personal experience with that on your side.
Not really anything to add on my side. No exact experience with that, with what I was involved in. No.
Same here. I think it's a good point, the modularity that Claudie raised.
Essentially, what you're getting to is for whatever the needs are, the modularity and the approach is really allows you to adapt it to your own personal needs and requirements as you go forward. So that helps you future-proof as well, but it also helps in terms of the integration into the laboratory.
Exactly.
Okay. So one of the things I wanted to ask is, what was the aspect that you appreciated the most in your experience in terms of helping to design these new spaces? And what insights did that give you as well as a scientist or as somebody working in the field? So, I forgot to say who am I addressing? So perhaps we can start with Robert. Oh, I think you're still muted, Robert.
Got it. No, I got it. Just a little delayed. What I really appreciated the most out of this experience was really just kind of taking a critical view on what a successful lab looks like and kind of seeing it, you know, being forced to see it outside the picture of what I'm used to, which is just working in an existing lab. Really, what this entire process gave me, at least from insight, is just how difficult it is to design a lab and all the various factors that go into it. And I feel, you know, being involved essentially from the ground up designing what should go into a lab, what should the network infrastructure, the electrical infrastructure look like, and everything like that. It just made me kind of really appreciate, for lack of a better term, kind of how labs are put together and the planning that goes into them. So I think that's definitely what I appreciate the most out of the experience in being involved in helping to design different aspects of NRC Mississauga. And ultimately, you know, the insights I gained from it is just it kind of gave me a bigger perspective on what exactly is the role of a lab outside of an area where I just kind of do work and do experiments. So overall, I think it was a very great experience, and I kind of appreciate all these different aspects that were involved.
Great. Josué, parle-nous de ton expérience de ton côté.
Donc, moi, ce que j'ai trouvé, ou ce que je vais apprécier vraiment plus maintenant, c'est l'espèce de partage entre avoir un espace qui promouvoit la collaboration, des grandes tables, beaucoup d'espace, puis le côté pratique qu'il faut absolument avoir, donc le rangement, des espaces vraiment sécuritaires, puis aussi les coûts, parce qu'on peut pas tout avoir. Donc, je trouve que c'est vraiment très complexe de designer un lab pour le futur, alors que tu ne sais pas exactement quel type d'activité de recherche va se passer dans ce lab-là, tout en essayant de balancer la collaboration, les espaces qui vont accommoder plusieurs types d'instruments. le rangement de produits chimiques de façon que ce soit le plus sécuritaire possible. Donc, ça, c'est vraiment un défi, puis quelque chose que j'avais en fait j'avais jamais vraiment porté attention à ça avant d'être impliquée dans le processus.
Merci, Claudie. Josué, de ton côté, qu'est-ce que tu apprécies le plus dans ton expérience?
No, it's true that we realize more now what is behind like a lab, like designing a lab, and even more for the lab of the future, so to speak. I have to admit that now that when I visit other labs or when I see other labs, I will have a closer look to how like the electrical system is made, where the plumbing is going, and this type of things. That before I wasn't really paying attention. I was just wondering where it was to use it, and then potentially complaining because it was not like perfectly placed. But as a good French person, but now I realize like how much thinking, like Robert was saying, how much thinking there is behind, and it's really great to be able to discuss with architects that don't really have the same language that you do. Trying to translate what you have in mind so they understand, and trying to decode or interpret what they're saying to just be able to meet in ground and get like reasonable ideas that can be done.
Okay, great. We have two questions in our chat, so I'll hopefully we'll have time to go through both of them. One of the other questions we have is, with the imminent new technologies such as immunotherapies, vaccines, biologics, etc., all of these require super clean facilities. How is the current approach of the government implementing those facilities in Canada? Any thoughts to be able to on that?
I have a comment. So I'm not really in the field of vaccines or biology in general, but I know that for Mississauga, for example, there's clean rooms that were set aside or designed so it could be a clean room in the future. Now we'll be using it for something different, but the ceilings are higher and everything is set up that if one day we wanted to use it for like a clean space, then we could just like do like some modifications and adapt it for like doing some kind of clean chemistry. I don't know if that translates well to biology, but that's my experience at least.
Okay, I have another question, so I have time for it. It says, interdisciplinary research is critical both now and in the future. What do you envision as ways of generating and creating more ID work in labs both now and the future? So people, methods, etc. Anybody ready to tackle that one?
It's a great question, and I think it's already complex within one field. Let's say for us, like one field, like earth sciences or geosciences, there is a lot of different like subfield in there, and already at this level, it's very complicated to collaborate, to understand each other, because we have all our different jargon and stuff. And already at this level, I think the most important things is having open spaces as much as you can, to be able to have people that can interact like physically and talk to each other, which is not necessarily the case in old school laboratories, where you have like one room in the basement, one room basement usually is mass spectrometry. We're always in the basement. Other is like at the first floor, etc. So a mix of sub-discipline, or a mix of disciplines, if you wish as well, is the key. I think a physical mix. Of course, that's complicated right now because we're not really allowed to be together, but hopefully that will change.
Hopefully that will change, yes. So we've run out of time, but I would like to take the moment to thank our panelists, Dr. Robert Black, Dr. Claudie Roy, and Dr. Josué Jautzy for this very stimulating discussion. So thank you so much for your time and for being here today. And for those of you who joined us in this virtual room, please take the time to answer the feedback form that will pop up as you leave the room. So enjoy the rest of your conference. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you so much. Have a good day.
Thanks a lot. Have a great day.